Hello and good afternoon. We are just so excited that God has given us another week where we can come together for good dialogue here on the Pastor's Roundtable. I am glad to be here. My name, Pastor Roger Wade, as you see on the screen, along with Pastor Anslem Paul and Dr. Dion Henry. As your hosts, we are excited that you have joined us one more time. Today, we're excited that we have two of our stalwart leaders from around this wonderful work. We are excited that they have joined us. They are willing to be a part of this discussion that we're having here today. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Elder Gary Thurber, the president of the Mid-America Union. All right, we are so excited to have you here. And some of you are probably seeing the connection. Yes, he is my boss, and we're excited to have him here with us. I am also pleased and excited to have with us Elder Bill Winston, the president of the South Atlantic Conference. Between these two gentlemen, they're probably about 80 to 90 years of ministry sitting right here with us together. We're just excited that they are here. They have worked in many different parts of our church, and we are glad that they're with us. Let's have a word of prayer before we jump right on in. Father, one more time, we ask you to come and guide this discussion. We pray that those who hear it will hear something that will encourage them, that will give them a sense of hope, and give them that opportunity to hold on to what's to come, is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
All right. Again, we just want to say thank you for those of you that are watching. You're watching on several different streams today. You're seeing one of these streams on YouTube. You're seeing one of them, or two of them actually, on Facebook right now, and it might be being shared on a couple of other Facebook pages. What we would like to invite you to do is, if you are watching or wherever you're watching from, just give us a little shout out. We'd love to know who you are or where you're watching from. We want you to feel free to use the comment section on the page. You're going to see a comment section obviously on your Facebook page, but if you're watching via YouTube, there's also going to be a live chat section to the right of your screen, and we want you to take advantage of that. You can ask questions, you can give comments. We're not going to be able to promise that we can get to every single question if there's lots of questions, but we're going to do our very best. But we want you to take advantage of that. While we have all of these experienced men and these years of experience with us, we want to be able to tap into that as much as we possibly can. So please feel free, introduce yourself, let us know where you're coming from. If you've got a question, feel free to post it, and we're going to do our best to get to it as we go along.
All right. Again, just thank you so much. We've done this show just talking about how to do ministry in a COVID-19 world and beyond. And I think that this platform gives us a chance to just evaluate where we are as a denomination. And again, just so privileged to have you, both of you, on our show today. You've seen leadership from a different vantage point. You have served as pastors, now presidents. You lead a large field. You have also sat on committees and have been privy to discussions regarding how to do effective ministry. So the first question I want to ask, from a leadership perspective, I know that COVID-19 has posed some challenges, financially and the way we do ministry. How do you see this church going forward, and how do you see the issues of COVID-19 and others impacting the infrastructure of our church? So again, we're a church, we're in a very delicate time, COVID-19, there's financial challenges, ministry challenges. How do you see this impacting the infrastructure of our church? Gary, you want to start?
Well, either way, I'm happy with you to start, Bill. Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And for the chance to dialogue. It's just the most important thing we can do is talk together. I want to first of all just say, just a shout out to our pastors in this church and our teachers in this church. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. The reason why I have no fears about the future in this church is because these are our leaders that are working, and what you've done in the field with your churches, what you've done online, what the ways and creative ways you've reached your people is just inspiring to me. The Lord knew that I couldn't be pastoring right now because I don't have the technology ability you guys have to do what you've done. So, and our teachers to go from teaching in a classroom one day to the next day having to put everything online and to finish a year out, from our grade school to our collegiate to our universities, hats off to all of them. Moving forward, I think two parts to your question, if I heard, moving forward with this COVID virus environment and then how might it affect the infrastructure of the church. I think that's probably one of the big topics we hear a lot about. As far as the church goes, I don't know. I think we're going to get back to normal one day, whatever normal looks like. I'm sure it'll be a different normal than what we've had in the past. But there's going to be a day when we can fellowship together again. As beautiful as all the live streaming and the Zooming and the Skyping has been, boy, don't you miss that hug at the door, that embrace, that sound you get from singing all together. I sing every time I'm with worship here on my screen, but it doesn't sound as good as when I'm singing with the rest of you. And I am uplifted and love that. So I think we will. I don't know what the timing will be. I do think we need to be cautious. Scripture is very clear that we look out for the interests of ourselves, but even before ourselves, the interest of others. So we've got to take care of each other, especially those that are more high risk and vulnerable. So we need to be thoughtful, but we're going to get back together. I think, the large question is, what about how it might affect our church? I hope it affects it this way. Rather than get too specific on, because every person has a different idea how it could all be different. What I pray is that this opens up dialogue that we haven't had in decades. Dialogue is where we've got to be. We've not, Bill, we've been doing this for a while. It shocked me a little bit when he said 80, 90 years of ministry. I'm not sure how old I look, but maybe quite that many.
Very generous.
Yeah. But, for decades, literally decades. Well, I'll say my whole ministry, and it's been decades. And before that, there's been no change in the church structure. Tell me how many businesses you know that haven't gone through some metamorphosis for change as time comes by. But what happened is we had an environment where dialogue was almost impossible. And what I would hope is not only do we have meaningful dialogue now about how to make sure we are funding the front lines the best we can, but also set up in our structure for the future that these dialogues are just automatically things that just take place, so that it doesn't look like anybody's trying to overthrow anything. It's just part of who we are. We dialogue, we look at, we reevaluate, and we examine how we're doing ministry so that we make sure that where our pastors and our teachers are on the front lines, they're supported.
And I concur. Our pastors and teachers and the department of directors have done a fantastic job. We have not had a corporate worship service since the second Sabbath of March. We were closed the entire month of April. We did not feel the full effects of having our churches closed in March because the first two Sabbaths were the money Sabbath, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes,
so we did, but now we have the whole month of April without a church door being open. Those who have been faithful with their giving have been faithful. They've come by the conference office. They've come by the churches and dropped money in buckets outside. So, but this is the month of April. We will feel the full impact of it. Now, here's what I have learned: is that our members know that we can do church in less than 5 hours. They know that, and they're not gonna sit in church for 5 hours anymore. We do a church service from our conference office every Sabbath morning, and we start at 10, and we're done before 12. I've been to church this morning. We had a very nice Mother's Day service. Our members are not going to allow us to keep them there to 2 and 2:30 anymore. That's just not going to happen. And when we do open the doors, and we had that discussion this week with our administrators as to when do we try to open back up. And we're looking at the first Sabbath of June to see if we can open our doors and allow the saints back in. Now, many of them are not going to come back. They enjoy. They have some of the older saints. We have learned how to turn on our computers and go different places. And we start out in Bermuda with services in the Caribbean, and we come through all the time zones.
Yeah.
And if something is not to our liking, we just do a couple of clicks and we're in another time zone. So it's true. But I am getting good feedback from the saints who enjoy the streaming services from their churches, from us. I am surprised as to how comfortable people have gotten being home. Mm-hmm. They really are. They really are. So I do know we have to be a little more intentional about how we deliver this gospel. It's been good for me to learn, because I was not a techno savvy person, but I know enough now to be on 10 hours of Zoom calls in a day. But the worship service is the thing we get feedback of. They enjoy the time that we have. They're looking forward to being together. They've asked me many times, when are we coming back to church? And we're praying, and we're asking the Lord if the 1st of June, the first Sabbath of June is the time to come back. But it's going to be different. It's going to be very different from what it's traditionally been.
Elder Winston, I could not help but notice that in your beginning in talking about the impact that COVID-19, that you spent some time talking about money, resources. Can either of you, from either conference level or union level, dig into that a little bit more, into how has what have we seen, what do we expect to see financially, how that impacts either the structure of the church or just the delivery of ministry from the church?
Mm-hmm. We started out with a commitment not to have a reduction in force, that we would pay our workers, that we would try to stay in touch with our members. And we were saying to our pastors, each church should have a remittance every month, because if nobody else returns tithe, you should. You're getting paid. So that should be a remittance that's coming in. But in the month of March for us, I think we were down in giving about 15%. Now, again, as I mentioned in April, that's going to be a little different. We have saved money because we're not traveling as much. Mm-hmm. I have not been on an airplane in 2 months. Don't want to get on one. I've not stayed in a hotel. I've rented a car. I have enjoyed being home and not traveling. And I would think, I have no idea, but it has to be Gary, $1 million+ that this church has saved, this division has saved in travel.
Wow.
And I don't think I'm a long ways off, but just in that, we made the commitment. Now, South Atlantic, thanks to my predecessor and his astute financial acumen, we have some reserves that we can fall back on. God has been good to us, and those reserves have been in place for 12 or 15 years. We haven't touched them. This next month, and of course, most of the conferences, the remittances are doing around the 10th of the month, which means Monday they're due, and we'll have a different look as to how that's going to be. We have not furloughed any employees. We've done work from home. We've made 2 paydays since then, and that's just the goodness of the Lord and the faithfulness of the saints. Because if the saints are not faithful in their giving, we don't get paid. So, but we're anxious to see how this past month has closed. But we've made it so far. God has blessed us. The saints have been more than generous and kind to us. And we think the Lord's going to do it. We made a decision. You didn't ask this, but we made a decision not to apply for any CARES money. We've not asked for any money from the government. That's South Atlantic, and that's us. Other people can do what they choose to do, but we have chosen not to ask for any money for the reason that I mentioned before, that we do have some reserves, and we are just not comfortable taking the money from the government. We haven't done so. We don't plan to. Now, if the bottom falls out next week, I'll be filing an application. But right now, we seem to be okay. And we'll get through this.
Yeah, from Pastor Paul, from our union standpoint, I think we were down collectively altogether about 10.9% in March. A little less than that because that was against a big windfall one of our conferences had last year. So more in the 4 to 5% range overall. But like Bill said, the challenge will be more April when we don't have any Sabbaths. And a number of people have lost their jobs in April. And so I think that we'll see a bigger downfall. I was a conference president for 13 years, and I've been a union president for about 5. A union budget is a lot easier to balance than a conference budget. And that's mostly because all of our money is already spent before we even do anything. And we have a much smaller payroll. Mid-America Union's we've chosen to be a small union so that more money can stay in the conferences. We're only about 18 employees. Conference has many employees. I really applaud, Bill, your leadership and the one before you, because having reserves right now is really the key. If you have reserves, you can go 3 months with a dip in tide. And employment of all your people and healthcare and all those things are stable. I hope this is one thing that will come out of this virus thing, and that is people will not look at reserves as something dirty anymore. Wow. The reserves is really a very important piece of financing our church, because the bottom line is, when you're a conference president, it's not just the livelihood of all those that work for you, but it's their health care. It's everything. And it's a moral responsibility that we really have. So about 3 of our conferences applied for the government money. I think 3 of them got it. One of them got it and then chose not to accept it. Another thing that we've done, and this is just Mid-America Union, this is not for anybody else, but we've decided to give back to the conferences 1% of the tithe. Not 1% of our 9% we get, because that'd be a much smaller number. But we're actually calculating what their percent is of tithe that they get each month and giving back 1%. So we're doing what we wanted. We're doing all we can do on 8% as opposed to 9%. And we're doing that this year, and we'll keep doing it if we need to help our conferences stay solvent. So that's what we've done in Mid-America. We hope it blesses. We've got good leaders in our conferences here, and wonderful leaders.
Gentlemen, first of all, when I said 80 to 90 years of experience, I know you have given a lot of years to ministry. I didn't want to tell everybody all the business, but when you add up both numbers, it does get up into those numbers. So don't think it's one of you, it's both of you. But one of the things that you shared that came out, I made some notes, was that the concept of in-person ministry, in terms of dealing with the fact that the structure is not supporting that in-person, how in the future, how do you see, I just read an article the other day that they don't see churches really getting back to where it used to be, where people can come for another year. It's going to be probably about a year before they're going to gradually growing. You're going to get back. We're going to have to be in groups of 10. Then we're going to have to be in groups of 20 and 50. I think out where I am in the Mid-America, we could probably get that number faster because we have more. We're not as densely populated like an Atlanta or the Charlotte or those places. But what do you see the balance? What would in-person ministry would lose out, or because we are not connected, or are we going to have to really find new ways to do in-person ministry?
I think you're right on that, Raj. We're going to have to be creative. The saints will help us. They will help us know how to do that. But one of our matriarchs of the conference, Sister Catherine Hairston, wife of our former president, Ralph Hairston, died a few weeks back. We had about a dozen of her family members standing on a hillside out in a desolate cemetery to say our goodbyes to her. One of the most difficult things to do is not to be there, the ministry of presence when people are grieving. That has been hard. We have, and most of you know, Pastor Darrell Howard, who's our Sabbath School Children's Ministry leader. His wife just died a week ago, and we're trying to find out how we can minister to that family. How we can. We think we can. This coming Friday, when we have her service, that we can have maybe 50 people. And we're looking at a place like Atlanta Berean, where everybody can have their own corner and be spread out, where we can have a service. That's one of the most difficult things that we've had to do, is to try to minister to people who are grieving and who are hurting and who are hospitalized and who are suffering, and we can't do that ministry of presence. That's difficult. And that's going to go. You know, part of our culture is potlucks, and Sabbath, and hugging and greeting and fellowship time. Sometimes you have to wave the saints back in because they get so. And I miss that. I really have. And how we do that, I don't know when we'll do that again. I just don't know. And Roger, you're probably right. It's going to be not weeks, but months before we get to any degree of normalcy. And it's just who we are, and as a people and as Adventists, and it's going to take some real thought. Now, our pastors are very creative. They come up with some wonderful things. I've been to a service online where they welcome people into the church because they baptize them, and 75% of the church was on the Zoom call, where they gave them the virtual right hand of fellowship. Good service, very good. There are all kinds of things they're coming up with, but that being together, I never will forget a lady who was a member of mine at Berean, and I was not when I came into this work, I was not a hugger and a embracer, and I was like, shake your hand and doing all of that. And there was one lady that would come through each week and kind of wait. If somebody else was talking, she'd wait to get a hug. And one Sabbath, she said to me, "This is the only hug I get all week."
Wow.
I said, wow. Never occurred to me. So we've got lonely people. We get people who are missing the human touch. We've got people, and that's going to be hard. It's going to be slow coming back.
Yeah, that was something beautiful about the ministry of Christ. Is he would touch people nobody else would touch, and what a difference that touch made. The Hebrews says, "Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together," for a reason. There is nothing like coming together and having that fellowship. And I think, Billy, you're right. It's going to come back in stages. I think fellowship dinners are way down the road.
Yeah.
When we first start coming back, the most vulnerable probably need to stay home for a while. But maybe an upside, Dr. Henry and Pastor Paul, an upside to all this is maybe we've learned some things that we can implement in shut-ins, and those that have not been able to attend our church will feel more part of our family than ever, because we've been able to learn how to do what we've done here through Zoom and Skype and streaming, that they can enjoy and feel part of their family. And so I think, that's a positive thing that can come out of this.
All right. There was a question that just popped up on the screen. I'm going to put back up for us here. It's from Jennifer Sharon. She says, are you going to allow churches to use evangelistic conference funds to purchase online equipment for reaching members and the community in the spreading of the gospel? So those evangelism budgets that us pastors apply for, when those things come out, are we going to be allowed to use those budgets instead of pitching a tent? Can we buy a camera? Can we buy all of that?
We had that discussion. That's a very good discussion. We have had to, on occasion in years past, to send back some evangelism budgets because there were some expense items in there that were not included in what evangelism funds could be used for. But now you can use as much imagination as you want to see how monies can be spent. I remember years ago when we did tent evangelism. And I knew every year I was going to pitch a tent, and rather than go rent some equipment somewhere, sound equipment, I bought evangelistic equipment out of my evangelism budget, so that every year they put up the same lights in my tent because I stored them. I had the speaker, the equipment, my old projector that I showed the slides on the screen with. That was part of, and that was used with evangelism money. So I think there is room for discussion and room for some kind of compromise, that if this is used for evangelism, that it can be included in that. We've kind of breached that subject a little bit. And yes, we have to use some modern techniques, and those things cost money. We remind people that, okay, this is part of the evangelistic money, evangelistic budget. This belongs to the church/conference, and it is not something that goes when you go. We have to make an account and let the people know. But yes, that's a discussion that we've already had, and I think there's light in doing that.
So Elder, in light of the discussion, the answer you just gave, I just want to be more, see if we can make it very plain as a layman sitting in the pew. Are you saying to me there are certain things that we cannot use evangelism funds for when truly we are realizing we can't do evangelism the way we used to do it? So, I mean, is there a fudge? Is there a gray area? Is there an actual, hey, we need to meet the times in which we are dealing with?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of gray area. And I will make a decision based upon how you have done evangelism in the past, your successes. That's how we do evangelism money. We look at where you are, the area, the size area, the population that you work with. We look at your prior years of baptisms and all from your meetings, and then we make decisions as to how. And then there's a very good formula. But we've had some challenges too with the use of evangelism money, and we just want to make sure that it is handled properly, that this is indeed evangelism, that the funds that you have dispersed have gone to the meeting. But if you don't have some equipment and some technology going forward, you won't be doing evangelism. You just won't. Mm-hmm. Were it not for today, my iPad, I would have missed this call, because even my Mac doesn't want to work today. So, and I have been on more Zoom meetings. We use also a company called Winston. I have been on more calls. My Tuesday is my best day. I'm usually on 10 hours worth of calls on Tuesday, because we meet with our support staff, we meet with our departmental directors, we meet with our pastors. In between, the regional presidents have a call. This past week, I don't know if it was Breath of Life or there was another beginning. But when you sit in a chair for 10 hours, talking to a screen and taking a bathroom break when you can and getting a drink of water when you can. But that's the way life is now. And this flying back and forth across the country and sitting in meetings for 2 or 3 days, I think those days for the immediate future going. You see how the General Conference has cut back GC for next year.
Right.
They have cut it off at the knees and above. and I understand, Gary, you were there at the meetings, the conference presidents, but I think that's not just for next year. That's for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, 2025 in St. Louis, they're doing the same kind of GC.
So what is that? I'd be curious to know.
Right. So you're saying in 2025, the GC will only consist of delegates and their families? That's the way I interpret.
That's correct.
So people from other parts of the world, from North American division, who want to, be a vendor and put up a booth, and is that going to be in 2025 based on the current conversation?
They're going to have no booths. Now, at our last, I think, I'm not sure if you were on the call or not, Bill. I think it was at our last meeting that we had, spring council meeting. Someone did raise the fact that there are some lay people who want to go ahead and have an exhibit hall at both Indianapolis and St. Louis. And Elder Wilson just said, yeah, we won't have any part of that. So if there is an exhibit hall, it will be an external group that decides they want to support one.
Dig out your old pictures of Atlanta 2010. That's the last real general conference you had.
Okay. Wow. So I want to ask this question. So we see that the general conference, they're making adjustments in the sessions. Has this time been a time of reflection on streamlining our operations, both in the union, the conference division? I mean, how about the past conversations that you've had and discussions that you've had dealing with streamlining our operations so that we can have a more effective ministry?
Ken, before you hit that, can I, Dr. Henry, can I give a little bit more context to that? We have heard down at pastoral, I should say over at pastoral level, that, and even at the lay level, there have been reports that say things like, this denomination is so top heavy, and they back that statement up, or they seem to preface that statement by saying, because we hire more people who stand behind a desk than who preach behind a pulpit. And so there's often, this conversation is often had as if the structure of the organization is in conflict with the mission of the organization, particularly when it comes to the allocation of resources. So that we've got so many people who are not directly, actively engaged in the mission. And that's an assumption, I think, but that they're not engaged in mission. But that's the perception, as opposed to those who are Bible workers, who are pastors, who are actually engaging a mission at the local church level, where the assumption is that's where mission takes place more directly, not so much at a conference office or at a union office or division office or GC office. And so I think to go behind Dr. Henry's question, has the streamlining, has that been taking that concept into account?
I'll take a first crack at this, Bill, and then you shore it up where I mess up here. I just have, it's such a broad topic. I'm going to try to answer a couple of things here, and I'll try to do it really quickly, knowing our time is short. I've heard all of that, Pastor, and I've been on that side. I pastored many years and had all those same thoughts. I will say that some of the articles that have come out are not very accurate in terms of number of people employed here and there. If you don't think our teachers are frontline ministry, well then, I don't know who are. And they consider those non-pastoral, so they're lumped into the sum. And if you don't think a conference youth director is pastoral, I don't agree with that either. They do incredible ministry to our young people. And they're lumped into that. So, when you really break it down, I'm not sure some of those things that come out in some of those articles are completely accurate. But I do want to say this, though. There has been a great change that's taken place over the last 10 or 15 years. And it's a great change. It's a proper change. I started in 82, so I'm not that old. And I can tell you back in 82, and then my father worked for the church for years before that, and it was certainly that way when my father worked for the church. It was a very top-down organization. The GC spoke, and then we didn't have much of a division way back in those days. But then the unions, they listened, and the union spoke, and the conference listened, and the conference spoke, and the pastors and teachers listened, and it just, everything came down. And there was very little room for dialogue. It was a mainframe, if you know what I mean. If you know some leadership lingo, that was a mainframe style of leadership where you have one brain and a bunch of dummy terminals. And we've turned that around over the last 15 years to an internet church, where everybody's connected, and we have much more brain power now than we've ever had before. But the key is this. When I started as a union president 5 years ago, we had our first president's retreat. The first thing I said to them is, what kind of union do you want, presidents? I was talking to my conference presidents. Because, see, we serve you. You don't serve us. And so we had quite a dialogue, and we made some changes. And some of the things that they weren't needing, but we were doing, we've cut out. And so the dialogue was, I need to hear from my conference presidents, what kind of union do you need? What do we need to do to be a support to you and the pastor and the teacher? See, those conversations need to take place everywhere, because they'll be different everywhere. And I'm almost done. And so then now the next level, the conversations need to take place. Who gets together and says, what kind of division do we need? We don't serve the division, they serve us. So at some meaningful level, a group needs to come together with the NAD listening and saying, here's what we need and here's what we don't need. And we've turned this thing upside down, because as a conference presidents, you're listening to your pastors and your lay people. What kind of conference do we need? What kind of union do we, what kind of, now you get to something very critical, what kind of GC do we need? Instead of the GC deciding what they need to be,
come on,
the field needs to be the one to tell the GC, here's what we need from you. And I'm not one of these people who don't think that we can just cut all these different layers, because you do, there's some other consequences to that. But we certainly have got to turn this upside down so that we're serving rather than them serving us. And those dialogues, if we miss that, we have great opportunity with this COVID environment to have those dialogues and to keep them ongoing from here till Jesus comes, not just once every 4 decades. And we have got to be having those dialogues and getting serious. If we do those things, I think we all come back together in a great way, and people are certain, and our local fields are stronger.
We had a discussion, and let me step away for about 35 seconds. Hold on.
Elder Thurber, thank you for that perspective. I think, and just kind of couching, particularly how you led off, a lot of people have not really factored in those particular persons as you contextualize that are teachers, not necessarily standing behind the pulpit, but they are in fact on the front lines of ministry. So thank you for adding some contour and some context to that.
And I am back. The little red light came on my iPad to let me know that it's 9% battery. But
over
a few years back, we had a discussion. We were on a committee, some of the same thing about church structure. And one of the suggestions that came out of that was that we need to do away with the unions. We don't unions. They're a waste of time and a waste of money.
My Lord.
And that conversation got kicked around, and then the idea came, well, okay, all we need is 5 unions. We should take the United States and quarter it, have a northeast, a southeast, a northwest, and a southwest, and then we would, for good measure, we would add a Canadian union, and there would be 5 unions instead of 9 unions. But when you sit down and you start talking about that, we're about doing ministry. How does this church do ministry? Now, if you will look at some of the denominations, especially the African American denomination, the leaders of the church have churches. The bishop has a church. The archbishop has a church. They just don't do administrative duties. They're in the pulpit every week. Mm-hmm. And while I'm saying that, let me just pass on condolences to our fellow laborers in the Church of God in Christ. They have what they call workers' meeting, just like we do. And back in March, we had workers' meeting for South Atlantic with our pastors. They had a workers' meeting, and 2 dozen contracted COVID-19 and have died since March. We don't see eye to eye on everything. We don't agree on everything, but that just hurts me to think that 2 dozen of their church leaders died from COVID from meeting together at a workers' meeting in March. But this whole idea of how church is structured and what's best, out of that same meeting came the idea of how do we share time. And one of the ideas that came up that I won't forget was that we all give 10%. Okay? The members of the churches send their 10% to us in the conference. The conference would just send 10% to the union. And then the union would send 10% to the division, and the division would send 10% to the world church. Now, that's not the way it is now. It was oversimplifying it. But then when we had the discussion of how the funds come back from the union, as Gary said before, they're returning a percentage of time to their conferences, which will go back to the churches. When you look at the things that are shared, ministry, monies we get back for education, monies we get back for evangelism, I used to call it money laundering. It just goes up and comes back down, but it's not quite money laundering, but the way we do business is kind of different. It's kind of different. But it not for the higher organizations supporting the lower organizations and vice versa, we would have a very difficult church structure to maintain. I would not mind having a church, but I would not be able to be in the churches 3 out of 4 months and sometimes 12 out of 13 and a quarter to visit the churches and minister to the saints and break bread. I would miss that. I actually enjoy having to sit down with the saints in the churches with 10 members and the churches with 1,000 members. It's a beautiful thing. This church is full of beautiful people, and one of the advantages of what I do is that I can sit down and talk with them and see how the kids are doing and the grandkids are doing. And when I leave, I say, see you at camp meeting, because that's where we get a chance to do it. So to mess with the structure without having a good alternative is dangerous.
Mm-hmm. All right, we've got a couple of questions, good questions. One was a follow-up question, and there's one similar to it. I want to put this one up. This one says, so is the term evangelism used here only referring to the programmed evangelistic efforts? I'm assuming that means programmed public evangelism efforts. Evangelism in this day and age requires more personalized ministry. So can evangelism funds not be used for ongoing ministry to the community? Before we get to that, I want to put one up that's very similar, and it was a follow-up, and this was from Jennifer. She says a clarification on her previous question. So if churches propose expense budgets for equipment to their conference and how they will use these funds, it may be acceptable. I think that's supposed to be a question. Will it be acceptable for evangelism support? So those two things together, I know we've covered it a little bit, but just I want to make sure that our audience is getting their questions seen and heard here. And then I've got one more that I thought was a very, very astute question that merits some. So let's any follow up on those two questions or any of those questions.
Well, I can, at the union level, I don't tell the conferences how to do that. And that's just something a local conference sorts out in their own field, and they all do it a little differently. And I support however they do it. So I think that's something a local conference will talk about, and I think every conference is represented here, or people listening will probably all do it a little differently. Okay.
And we would, and we have looked upon it with favor. Now, evangelism, did any of you tune in to Finishing Strong this past week with Carlton Bird, Breath of Life?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's evangelism. That came out of an idea by the Vice President for Education in this conference in South Atlantic, Kim Gator. Kim said, Elder Winston, I've got an idea that the Lord has given me about having an evangelistic meeting. And she started with maybe the regional conferences in the Southern Union can do. And then she said, well, maybe see what the other presidents think about that. And the next thing I knew, I was in a meeting and they were talking about trying to get a letter from Ted Wilson. I said, wait a minute, what happened? This thing just exploded. It was awesome, and that was evangelism. Right. So evangelism is thinking out of the box, is saying, here's how we need to do it. But if you're going to do evangelism, and I'll say this again, if you're going evangelism going forward and you don't have some equipment and some technology to fall back on, you're just not going to be doing it. You're just not. My days of pitching a tent and having a slide projector and a set of speakers, those days are gone. And we're going to have a way of reaching out to the saints. So yes, for South Atlantic, we will look favorably upon it, and I think the other conference administrators will too.
I want to jump right in here. In my days as a local pastor, I looked at even Sabbath mornings being evangelistic. I think we tend to put evangelism in its own pot, in its own area, and we prepare for that one time of the year. Whereas I believe that evangelism happens every Sabbath. Somebody walks into your door and you open the doors to the church. That's how I was taught. Every sermon ought to have an opening of the doors to the church and inviting people in to get to have a relationship with Christ. That's evangelism. And when you do that on a regular basis, there is no line, no place where you jump over and decide, hey, maybe I'll do evangelism this week or I'll do evangelism next week. I'm in evangelism mode every Sabbath because that's what God has called us to do. So maybe I'm crazy to say that.
So here's the challenge, I think, Pastor Wade, with that, and that is in many of our churches, we're not just unable to get people to show up for the 2-week crusade or it used to be 6 weeks and then went to 4 weeks and then 2 weeks and now it's a week and then
4 days now.
It's not that we can't get people to show up those. We're having hard times getting people to show up for regular church service now, right? So even that becomes an issue. So, and that's a great segue into this question. Carlton Knott says, with this shift to online evangelism, how do we get real commitments which affects our numerical church growth? So somebody's tuning in to this online evangelism crusade. They're every night. They logged in and did the online Bible studies, but they live in Finland, and they're watching this thing. Is there a mechanism? Is there a structure that we have right now already that helps us transition this? We feel great about it because right now we're counting our success in online evangelism by the number of views that we get, right? And we're seeing, we had church service today and we had, there's 300 more views today than we ever have in the building. And we're saying our online attendance has shot up by 500%, 600%. I got a buddy in town across from me who he has about 1,000 members or so in his church, about 1,100 members. He did a church service, had 54,000 views. And he's getting, 20,000, 30,000 something views. But when you make the appeal on that online sermon, it's not like you got a Bible worker going and passing out cards. What's the plan? Do we have a plan? Is there a structure? How do we make that happen?
Without personal follow-up and without baptism, there's no soul in the church.
Right.
So there has to be some personal one-on-one contact and follow-up. So any evangelist who would be honest, those of us who have run meetings and pitched tents, we love to stand there night after night and preach the word of God. But it's the Bible workers out there beating the pavement that bring those decisions and to take those bags for baptism out and get the people. They're out there. My wife's a Bible worker. She's done that. My wife has done some things that have scared me. When she's out getting people, especially on the Sabbath morning of baptism, to follow through with that decision. And I have been with her a couple of times working in some meetings where she's trying to get people. And the heart-rendering thing is that sometimes later when they get settled and established in the church, and they will tell you some of the stories of how they hid from you and how they ran from you and how those things. But you've got to have some personal contact to get the decision. And good question. In the meeting last week, we asked pastors and teachers to follow up. There were hundreds of young people last week who made decisions for baptism.
Wow.
So hundreds. Carlton Bird can't follow up on that. Kim Gator cannot follow up on that. So it has to go back to the pastors. It has to go back to the Bible workers. It has to go back to the teachers to follow up on those. And as soon as our churches open, there ought to be a water shortage in this country because we ought to be filling up pools everywhere around the country, baptizing people who have made decisions. but we got to stay in touch with them in the meantime to keep them encouraged and keep that decision fresh.
Okay.
Everything just right on the target there, Bill. I couldn't agree more. I will say this though. Don't be fearful people aren't going to come back because they're used to watching online. You'll be surprised. It's going to be gradual because some are going to be afraid to come back for a while. Some are going to be vulnerable for a while, but they're going to come back. And that, I'll never forget, I was with Pastor Charles Osborne in St. Louis about a year ago. And a lady walked into the church that day that they'd never seen before. And she came on because she'd been watching 3ABN. And she had to go find a church that believed the things she now believed. And she needed fellowship. She couldn't just watch. She needed fellowship. And I think that's in us. I think that's in all of us. And that fellowship is important. And as good as Zoom is and Skype, it's not the same. And I think we all know that. Don't be fearful. Your members are coming back. It's going to take some time, but they'll be back.
So if I can follow up with that. So in essence, Elder Winston, that concept of responsibility of the teachers and the pastors to follow up, that's not necessarily a new thing, right? Because we've had media ministry over the years, and so we've got the, AIM up at Andrews. The people do the call center, and they send cards and send contact information to churches. That's been happening for decades. So here's the other reality to that, though. So people at Andrews or AIM, that call center that takes calls from a lot of our various media ministries, they get these contacts, and the system is they're supposed to send them to a local church, wherever that call comes from, wherever that address or zip code is. And the reality is a lot of those things get in the mail. They stay on the clerk's desk. They stay on the pastor's desk. They stay in the personal ministries department desk, never opened, never followed up on, never followed through on. Is there something structurally that can put in place to help make that process more efficient or hold some greater accountability to that? Is that the job simply of the local pastor? Or is that something that within the structure of the conference or the union or the media ministry that conducts the thing, is there something that we should look to help support the responsibility that just lays on the local church and the local pastor?
Mm-hmm. Well, once upon a time, long, long ago, and far, far away, I went to a church my first week at seminary. And I made a mistake and went to the wrong church. And a deacon met me in the parking lot and said to me, he looked at me and my family and said, "I think you're looking for Highland Avenue.
Well,
if you go down here to the corner and make a right and go down, I got that. But I think you're at the wrong church." One of the problems with AIM is that when we look at AIM and we look at names, we don't know what church to send them to.
Okay.
When there are two Seventh-day Adventist churches, 6 blocks apart, and one is at one conference and one is in the other conference, AIM doesn't know which way to aim. And sometimes contacts go to the dead file, if I can use that. We have to be more sensitive. We have to know how to get people, and if a pastor gets a lead and that lead is not something that they're going to follow up on, then they need to pass it on to somewhere else. AIM and other ministries like that, we generally know that if we get a contact for Breath of Life, that 9 out of 10 times it's going to be a person. If we get one for It Is Written or some of the other ministries, we kind of know. But one of the problems is now that many of those, as you say, Pastor, many of those just don't get followed up on. And by the time we get them, sometimes the lead is cold, as Bible workers will say, the lead is cold, and the person has lost that interest. So it's important that they are followed up on immediately to make sure that there's someone who cares for them and follows up on them.
I've got to be really careful when I speak here, because it's been a number of years since I pastored a church, and I don't want to pretend like I know exactly the way it is today. But I think another problem, this is not going to be a popular thing for me to say. This is being recorded. I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. But I'll be really frank with you, Pastor Paul, and maybe Pastor Henry, you can chime in here too. I faithfully followed up all the leads I got from the media ministries. And if I got 1 out of 200, that was a good lead. That was a good day. Most of the time, they don't know why I showed up at their door. They just called in for a free book, and all of a sudden somebody's at the door. My point is that there's two pieces to it. One is it's got to be followed up locally, because you can't do that far away. It has to be a local thing. Right. But second of all, if it's not fruitful, after a while it becomes very discouraging. And so we need to figure out, that's always been the challenge. I always had members that were ready to go, but it was finding that good lead. Finding that person of interest. If you found and you had good leads, and that was the great thing about when I pastored in Florida. It's never been so fruitful finding good leads when I pastored down there. Some other parts of the country are not as easy, but boy, finding a good lead, and you hand a good Bible worker a stack, and they go out and they follow 50 cards, and not one of them wanted to see them at the door. That's very discouraging. So I think we've got to have good leads for people to follow up on, but it's got to be local. That's something we can't do at the conference or union.
Absolutely.
Right.
All right. Well, I think, Elder, you mentioned something earlier that I think gives a great opportunity to bring something else or put something else on the table here. We talk about this COVID-19 thing, and there's a lot of unrest in the country right now. There are people who are tired of being cooped up for so long. The what do you call that thing when you're in the house all the time? Cabin fever. Cabin fever. People have all the cabin fever. We've seen things like the number of domestic violence complaints has shot up under these conditions. Some of it is just because husbands and wives have to be around each other a lot more. Some of it is all of the pressure that's coming from the idea of losing work, losing job, losing income. So we've seen in places like Michigan, some of the other states where governors have insisted on continuing some of the stay-at-home, what do you call that? Stay-at-home orders, stay-home orders.
Protocol.
Right. And shelter in place, those things. And so there's people marching the streets and protesting against those things. We saw this past week, and I spent some time in my message today talking about another thing. We saw over this past week, I saw a video again of a police with a guy with his hands behind his back, pressed up against the fence, and then just started, you couldn't hear anything, couldn't see anything, but then just starts wailing away at him, beating him up against the fence while the guy's hands are behind his back. You've seen the incident that happened in a district that I used to pastor in, Brunswick, Georgia. For over 2 months, a young man is dead, and there has been no investigation until the Georgia Bureau of Investigation was brought into the local area. Now there was some arrests made. And so you have another set of people that are uptight, and there's a lot of unrest regarding that. So we've got, and the reality is, on those two issues that I brought up, you've got what tends to be or seems to be two opposite ends of the political spectrum, right? You've got one that tends to lean towards wanting to protest the stay-at-home orders, and you've got, generally speaking, another end of the political spectrum that would protest against the killing of the young man in Brunswick or some of the other police brutality stuff. We do not pastor in a vacuum. We say these things are happening out in the world, but we have members, our constituents live in this world. And they often come to us and look to us as pastors and even as conference leaders. Why aren't you saying anything? Or are you going to do anything? How are you as leaders in the various fields that you're, who have constituents that probably have leanings on both sides of that? How does this context of COVID-19 affect just this tension that's was already in place in the country? How is this COVID-19, does it impact in any way the posture that the church, simply the fact that there's a rise in tension, does it impact the way that the church should, or how you counsel your pastors, your churches, your conferences to deal or to address any of these type issues?
Garrett?
You want to start? It doesn't matter. Well, you've raised really a good question. It breaks my heart to see stuff happen like what happened in Brunswick. How much time do we have here? I want to be careful. I don't want to monopolize anything.
We have 24 minutes.
Okay, I can do this short, but little confessional time here. This is embarrassing, so I'm not proud of this. When I moved to the Lake Union in 2013, to be the secretary there, I had the privilege of working with Don Livesay. Right when I got there, the Lake Union was celebrating 70 years. The Lake Region Conference was celebrating 70 years of being a conference. And they had 4 celebrations around geographically in the Lake Union. I got to 3 of them. I grew up in the church. And I learned things going to that meeting, those 3 meetings, that I never knew before. About how as a church we really have failed in the past. I had no idea some of the things that I learned. It broke my heart. Cliff Jones and Tim Nixon were wonderful people for me to talk to in that union that helped me understand things that I never understood before. The amount of injustice and the kinds of things that you see and face in the world, it's pitiful that I was so slow in figuring that out. We cannot use the political parties as our measuring stick of what we say as a church. We have to use the measuring stick of what's right and what's wrong according to God's word. And whenever we see something wrong, we've got to speak out. And we can't be silent anymore. I know we've got to do that in a thoughtful way, and we've got to do it in a proper way, in proper timing, but we can't be silent. We have got to speak out regardless of worrying about what political party your people might be a member of. We got to speak out about what is right and what is wrong, and we've just got to do that moving forward. I hope I haven't said anything inappropriate, but that's just what's on my heart and what we've got to do, I believe, as a church.
And when we first came on this call, when you saw my sign on it said Bull City Bill, I mentioned that I am a native of Durham, North Carolina. Grew up, spent most of my growing up years in North Carolina. I have lived in 4 southern states. I've lived in North Carolina. I have lived in South Carolina. I have lived in Georgia twice. I've lived in Alabama. What you are seeing on TV now if you would just take the color off of it and do it in black and white, it looks like something out of the
Wow.
60s. I mean, it looks the same.
Yeah.
And that county in South Georgia has a history of racial profiling, racial tensions. It just hasn't changed. My church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I love this church. Let me start out by saying that I love this church. But we basically stepped aside during the Civil Rights era and had no real part in it because we didn't want to be political. We were non-participating in politics, and the racial injustices of the 40s, the 50s, the 60s was partaking in politics. Our church looked at it as. The reason we have regional conferences, we didn't have regional conferences because black people wanted to be separate. Our pastors wanted to be treated the same. That's all. But we didn't ask for anything else. And somebody said, "But we got a great idea. We'll give you your own, just like separate but equal." And the Brown versus the Board of Education, Thurgood Marshall, back in the
Topeka.
Black people were not saying we wanted to be separate from the white church. That was what was given to us. But you can count on a couple of hands those in this church who were active in civil rights. Terrence Roberts was one of the original 9 who integrated Little Rock schools. He was a Seventh-day Adventist. Charlie Joe, Elder Dudley, Earl Moore, Warren Banfield, who was a former president of South Atlantic, Franklin Hill, E.E. Cleveland was very much involved in it. But for the most part, our church watched from the sidelines. We can't let that happen again. We have to speak out. God requires it of us to speak out for injustice. So our church needs to be involved. We have done better. I must say that we have done better. But when you look at the pictures of those who were marching Edmund Pettus Bridge and things of that nature back in this earth's history, many of them were Catholic priests. They were very much involved in civil rights. Our Jewish brothers and sisters financed a lot of the civil rights. We got another chance as Adventists, and we need to take advantage of it.
I'd like to ask this follow-up. So is it, because we started this discussion and asked you gentlemen to be with us because we were kind of talking about structure. Right. Is there anything in the Adventist structure that has prevented us from being involved? Is it our structure? Is it our theology? Is it our culture? What is it that has kept us from being at the forefront or at least being involved along the way? Is it any one of those 3 things, or is it something else? I mean, if a pastor wants to go and address something, would he have been fearful to do so because of how his conference or his union or whatever was going to respond to it? What's the thing that is it the idea, the theology, the structure? What is it that has kept us from? Because our members and our community, it's as an evangelism issue to me. Because I'm going into the inner city to do evangelism to people who see my church sitting on the sideline, not interested in their issues and the stuff that affects them and impacts them. Then they're like, if your gospel can't change my world or has nothing to do with what I'm going through, then what use are you to me in the here and in the right now? So there's a part of this that straddles evangelism. It may straddle structure and some of the things that we've talked about. But what kind of a response would you have to any of those questions?
I'll start with an old saying that none of you that I can see on this screen have any idea what I'm talking about. That's the $64,000 question. That was a show back in the 60s, and that was the top prize you could win. And when you answered that, you won the $64,000. And a $64. I don't know. It could be all of what you said. I think it is a misunderstanding about the separation of church and state. I think that's where we go, because if we do anything that is in the least bit political, overtly or otherwise, then we're saying, well, no, the church has to stay out of that because that's the state, and the state has to stay out of that. But we are kind of commingled. We're kind of commingled. And politics is social justice, and social justice is the church, and the church is in many ways political. So I don't know if there's anything in the structure. To answer the first part of the question, Gary's going to have to answer the rest of it. The first part of the question is that I think it's our perception about not getting involved in politics and the separation of the two.
Right.
Well, I think we got to not mingle two different things here. The spirit of prophecy is really clear on getting involved in politics. Bad idea. It has nothing to do with politics to speak out against what happened in Brunswick.
Right.
But people will try to mingle it. They'll try to make it political. And that's going to be our job, is to say, I'm not talking about gun rights here, or I'm not talking about, anything to do with one party might support another one. We're just talking about something that should just not be part of America. It's something that should just be eradicated. And so I think we have to just make sure when we speak, we stay out of the other. I do think, Adventist pastors in the past, well, I know I would have been called in on the carpet if I had gotten anything political. If I'd show up in the evening news somewhere, I do know that that's been part of our structure in the past. I think we just have to be thoughtful and careful, but again, use a different measuring stick than what either political party uses. And it's called the gospel. It's called what Jesus has called us to, a life like his. And that's our measuring stick. And I think to those things, things like happening in Brunswick had no place. It's Christian. It has nothing to do with who we would want to be and what we want to promote for our community. So you really asked a deep question. I wish I had a better answer for you, Pastor. It was an excellent question. I think we just have to speak out and say, this is not, I'm not promoting a party here. I'm talking about right and wrong, as is measured to my Savior, Jesus Christ.
And those people who are lining up for a mile or more in a food line,
Come on,
because they don't have food to eat. That's not a white or black issue.
Right.
Those are just hungry people, and it's just as painful to see a little white child that has no food as it is to see a little black child, and people who never thought, and maybe some of them used to look down on us, I don't know, but now they're in the food line. It is just painful and hurtful to see people with this richest country in the world, and tomatoes are drying up on the vine, and there's food in the field, and people don't have anything to eat. That's terrible. The best medical treatment in the world. In the world, and now we have more COVID deaths than anywhere else in the world.
Wow.
I would say my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. We've got to start witnessing to people. We've got to start talking to people, whether their skin is the same as ours, whether they're the same complexion. We've got to start telling people that Jesus is coming soon. When I came back from church today, from our broadcast, my neighbor across the street, he's a Caucasian gentleman in his probably mid-80s. He was coming out his driveway on his walker to go to the mailbox, and we got there talking. He's part of probably some Christian church, First-day Church, and he saw me coming down the come in my driveway, and I waited for him to get his mail, and we had this conversation. And he says, you know, we've been neighbors for 22 years. He says, I'm not a theologian. I don't know. He said, but I think this COVID thing has something to do with the end of the world.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, we have he said, I'm not a theologian. He says, but I believe, he said, did God allow this? Did God bring this on? I said, I think God is trying to get our attention. And his face kind of lit up, and we talked probably for 15 minutes. There are people out here, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of social status, regardless of economic status, who need to know about Jesus. And every Seventh-day Adventist door of every church ought to be open, and everyone ought to be welcome, because the last events,
quick ones.
This is happening. Yeah. I'll tell you, and please don't repeat this, but I'm praying a lot more than I was 2 months ago. I really am. This thing is serious, and I pray for my children. I pray for my grandchildren. People are dying for lack of knowledge. They're being destroyed, and that's why we're here. God knew that this COVID would be here. He knew who would be doing what. And he knew that we were going to have to find some different ways to reach people. But it just breaks my heart to see lines and lines of people in this wealthiest country on the face of the earth being hungry and not having anything to eat. One of the best ministers we have going here now in South Atlantic Conference is the food ministry, the food banks and all. One of our churches, the Berean Church, the largest church in the conference, had to have the National Guard to help them control the traffic and the crowds each Wednesday noon when they give out food. It's painful to see, but we've got a lot of work to do that transcends race and politics and everything else.
Well, elders, as we prepare to wrap up, you tapped on two of the major issues, our young people, and you know that I'm very much involved in youth leadership and young adult leadership. What would you share with them? The two things you tapped on was the structure of the church, especially with our race issue, having black conferences and white conferences. You actually pointed out that it doesn't matter. We still have a gospel to share in whatever frame it is, because everybody is looking for the good news. But also you talked about the social justice, the fact that we can speak out to the things that are injustice in this world. What words of encouragement, especially as young people are looking to the church, what words of encouragement can you give to them as they're hearing this conversation from the both of you who are here with us today?
I think there are good people all around this nation, in our communities. I don't want us to judge all white Georgians by these two bounty hunters down there in Brunswick, Georgia. Mm-hmm. I believe that people have a good streak in them, and more people are good people than bad people. I don't believe. So I don't want to label, but young people who have grown up together, who've gone to school together, who hang out together, who text each other, they're friends, all races and all classes of people. I think that at some point in time, I never will forget one of my professors up at Andrews. Somebody asked him years ago when I was there, he said, when is the Seventh-day Adventist Church ever going to come together as one? And his answer I will never forget. He says, before that day comes, there will have to be a whole lot of funerals first.
My Lord.
Wow.
Never have forgotten that.
Wow.
Because some of the old thinking has to go away, has to die off, if you will, and it has to be buried before we can get there. I think that some of the things that are happening in our world today letting us know we got to put a lot of that foolishness behind us. So young people, this is the best place you can be in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I love it. We love you. You are the ones who are going to finish this work. Our young pastors, our young people. You're going to finish. You're going to usher in the coming of Jesus Christ. So be of good courage. Hang in there. If we don't want to move out of the way, just kind of give us a little bit of an elbow, nudge us a little bit. We'll move. But you are the generation that will finish this work. Hang in there. Be of good courage.
Roger, it's a great question. I love our young people. I know I don't look like it, but I used to be a youth director.
That's right. That's right.
And, yes. For a number of years. Actually, that's when Roger and I first got acquainted. And actually, I didn't know it, but I'm sure I met you, Pastor Paul, too, back in those days in the 90s. Yeah. The truth is, our young people are getting it right, and it's fun to see. It's fun to see the multicultural church that I see coming up behind here. It's beautiful, it's stronger, it's better, it's more creative and dynamic than anything I've ever seen. And we're in good hands with them coming up as our leaders. I'm just astounded by who they are and the depth in which they operate and think. It's going to be fun to watch. I would say to them, hang in there. They need to remember that our church is made of humans, which means we're not going to be perfect. And when we didn't get things right, that means we have a chance to get them right. But the truth is, we have a message that's like none other. And don't let our structure and those kind of things be the things you focus on. Where else can you go to have a better understanding of the character of God than the Seventh-day Adventist Church? And having a good understanding of who God is and seeing him in all the beauty that he is. You can't go any place other than the Adventist Church to get the view that we have. It's a gift that we've been given, we inherited, and we can hopefully pass on. But it's a tremendous message, and our young people are going to come up and get some things right that we got wrong and do some exciting things, and hopefully build on some things we did right too. Hopefully every generation can add to the story. But we have wonderful young people. I get energized when I go to our colleges. Bill and I get to sit on a number of boards together. And at the collegiate level and university level, those are my favorite meetings. It's just so amazing to watch our young people and who they are. So be of great courage. We have a church that loves the Lord. We know the Lord's coming soon, and can't wait to see how you lead and lead out and our church in years to come.
Let me just there are some areas in the cities that nobody's going to go evangelize with black people. Let's be real. There's some areas that we need black young people. We need regional conferences to minister to because no one else is going to minister to them. There's some areas in Appalachia that are areas where you can go miles and miles and not see a black person. But for the most part, this gospel is what's going to break down those barriers.
Amen.
So God calls us and appoints us to places he wants us to go. And if we are obedient to the Spirit and the call, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to all the world, including some areas of the inner city that have been neglected down through the years.
I had a quick question. I know we're coming close on time. First of all, I appreciate your input. Just dealing with this whole COVID-19 and ministry and how to win people to Jesus Christ by our actions and characteristics. What word do you have for the families now? We talked about the young people, right? And they're going to finish the work and so forth. But what about the families? The families are hurting. What hope do we have to give to those family units now that they are working at home, a lot of them. I know the country is reopening in some areas, but what word do you have to the family? What hope do we have for them as they continue to go on in this very stressful time in history?
Well, I'll just briefly say, I'll take 15 seconds here. The family is the core unit of our church. That's where all the building blocks come from. Parents, the work you do with our young people, nobody else can do in the home. The big thing I would say is make sure there's a family altar in that home. Make sure you're worshiping together. A family that worships together is so much more stable. It's been proven over and over again in statistics. Worship together, and that is the building block of our church. I didn't want to take any more time, Bill.
And one of the things that I miss more than anything else, besides being at home, most of my family, I have grown grandchildren. Much of my immediate family, my daughters, my only two daughters, my only two children, live here in the Atlanta metro area. Grandchildren live here, and we can't get together and fire up the grill and hang out. We've been social distancing from each other. But a few years ago, I was sitting around the table with my grandkids and some of their schoolmates from the academy and from Oakwood, and we were talking about, at that time, social media. And I made this comment in a proud and boastful way. I said, I don't have a Facebook account. I am not online. And they looked at me and smiled and said, oh, yes, you are. You're online. You better believe you are being talked about. You are being quoted and misquoted. You're online. You're out there. You may not have a Facebook account, but you're out there. So I started to say that in a different way. My grandchildren are some of the most beautiful people in all the world. And we've got a good relationship. Nana and Granddaddy and the grandkids, we have, and I listen to them. They are some of the smartest, and it might be a gene thing. I don't know. It might have, but they're some of the smartest, brightest, God-fearing young people that I know. And they keep Granddaddy. They keep his feet on the ground. They keep him balanced. They keep him anchored. And I love the time that I have with my grandchildren and my wife and my family, and I learn a lot from them. And they'll tell me about services being too long and sermons being too long, and this, that, and the other. They'll tell me straight up, and they will say about the music in the church and the worship styles. They get my back. And I think one of the best things to do is just listen to our children. Even at 10, 11, and 12 years old, it's amazing how much insight our children and grandchildren have. They are, and they love this church. They do. They just want to see it be more user-friendly for their generations.
Wow. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I mean, we have had, I don't know where the time went, but we've had a great time together. We have touched on a number of issues that are meaningful, not just to those online, but to the church in as a whole. And so we want to thank you for taking the time to be with us here today and sharing. I hope, Pastor Dion, you and I have talked about a number of these issues. I hope your questions have been answered, Pastor Dion.
Yes. I would say this, what a privilege, again, to have two leaders that took time to come on this program.
Yes.
To talk about these various issues, from social justice to the infrastructure of the church. And also what I got from this, and I hope our listeners got it, that we have leaders who are willing to listen, who want to dialogue, and also are creative so that the mission can be fulfilled. And the mission may mean, like my union president is doing, giving 1% back to the conference. We wouldn't mind some of that trickling back to the church as well, but that's another story. But again, just doing different things to get this mission across. So I appreciate so much.
And I applaud you. This is a great ministry. I feel honored to have received the invitation to be on. Thank you so very much for inviting me. Thank you for the work that you all do. Where we sit now, some of you all will be sitting in a few years from now. The Lord has already put His hand of blessing upon you, and when the time comes, you'll be ready, because a lot of that preparation to do leadership jobs for the Lord starts just the way you're doing now, listening to His voice and doing ministry where He has placed you. So I applaud you. Thank you for the invitation today.
All right, you guys have given us an idea that maybe we need to have this last part of this conversation. We need to do one of these gentlemen on just race relations in the church. I know it's kind of over. We've heard it before, but I think conversation helps. Got to keep doing it. However, next Sabbath, we're getting close to that. Next Sabbath afternoon, Pastor's Roundtable is going to be specifically addressing the concept of social justice, Adventism and social justice. And so we've got some guests that are going to be with us on next week dealing with that topic, so you don't want to miss next week. Thank you all so very much for joining us. We will see you again on next Sabbath. Elder Thurber, Elder Winston again, much gratitude. Thank you so much. God bless you to our audience that have joined us today. We want to see you back with us. Thank you for your input, for your questions. We know we didn't get to everything that you said. I don't know, Elder Winston, if you have the screen up, but there was a hi daddy that came from Lori. If I got that name, did I remember that name right? Lori Wins? Yes. So yes. She was saying hello. God bless you, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We will see you again on next week.
God bless. Thank you.